Teacher needs help in room 18. Can you please send the principal down? Teacher needs help, room 18. So I remember those days when I was a new general education teacher, and sometimes I would have students that I labeled as a behavior problem, and I wouldn't know what to do with them. Well, I thought, what you're supposed to do is then send them to the principal's office. So that's the strategy that I would use. Well, one day I had a student that said no, he wasn't going to the principal's office. And I was like, okay, Charmaine, now what do you do? And it was like, well, I guess I'll use the intercom and call the office and ask the principal to come down to my classroom. So that's what happened. The principal came down. I went out in the hall with the student. And when I saw that angry look on the principal's face and how close he got to my student's face, pointing his finger and yelling at him, I thought, if this is what happens when I send kids to the principal's office, this is not what I want to continue to do. But I still was at a loss. What would I do instead? And if you have ever been there as a teacher, or if you have ever gotten a phone call as a parent when your child is misbehaving, you might want to know what else can the school do that is a much more positive approach. Well, you're in luck, because today we're going to be talking about restorative justice and how it can be applied to our school, our classrooms. And we have a wonderful guest that's with us today, Lynn Lee. And Lynn and I actually have been friends since the 1970s. So that's probably before some of you were even born. And I was actually a paraeducator in Lynn's self-contained classroom in a segregated school. Remember, it was back in the 70s. And after being there about 3 months, the district decided to take some of the students from that segregated school and put them in a self-contained class in an elementary building. And I became that teacher. So Lynn and I have shared our love for interacting and being with kids and students for a number of years. Lynn is also a fabulous fiber artist who taught me how to dye silk using the shibori technique. And so we share a lot in common. Some things are different. Lynn loves hiking things like the Grand Canyon. That's not something I do with Lynn. But Lynn has had a vast amount of experience in life and with children in many different ways. And most recently, she's been really active in the restorative justice arena. And so Lynn is going to be sharing with us today not only a glimpse of how it works in the juvenile justice system, but also how we can incorporate the principles in our classrooms. So welcome, Lynn. I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today.
Thank you, Charmaine. That's quite an introduction. Yes, we've known each other for a very, very long time. Yeah.
So I think what I'll do is I'll share the slide that shows the 5 R's of restorative justice, because what I thought was interesting is I always talk to parents about the 3 R's of advocacy are relationships, relationships, relationships. And it was fun when I saw this example of the 5 R's of restorative justice, which are respect, responsibility, repair, relationship, and reintegration. So these are some of the basic values of restorative justice. So Lynn, if you want to talk just a little bit about, how you can give parents a picture of what restorative justice looks like.
Okay. First, I want to recognize a good friend of mine who has since passed away, but Dr. Beverly Title developed the 5 R's for restorative justice, and they are used throughout the state in Colorado in restorative justice programs. So that's been really helpful for us, and it's also been a way for us to um, put those principles out there in a way that I think are easy to remember and easy to understand. So when I work with juveniles in restorative justice, actually adults aren't very much different than kids, so it doesn't really have to be about kids. But for me, restorative justice is really primarily about relationship and developing relationships. So I might see kids who've committed offenses at school or in their communities, and they get referred, they get ticketed and sent to court. And the court might send them to us for a restorative justice process. And in those cases, what that looks like is sitting down with that individual and the person that they committed the offense against. So it might be, a vandalism offense. It could be a million things. It could be a theft. It could be an attempted theft. It could be a fight. Sometimes we'll see kids who got into fights in school. There's just a variety of different scenarios. So we would bring that person together, the person who committed the offense together with the person they harmed, the victim. And then we include community members. So if this happened in a school, I'll just use an example. So let's say a kid stole another kid's cell phone. That's happened more than once. So we would invite the kid who stole the cell phone. It's voluntary. They don't have to participate. And the kid whose phone was stolen. And we might invite some members of the school community because certainly if it happened in a classroom, it might have affected that teacher or other kids in the classroom. So they would come to talk about that, about how they were affected by what had happened. And I would have talked to them ahead of time. So I would have talked to the two people ahead of time to help them understand what the process was going to look like and make sure that they were appropriate. So if somebody steals a cell phone and doesn't feel any remorse for that, they're not appropriate for restorative justice. We're looking for people who feel bad about what they've done and are willing to do something to fix it. So we'd sit down, and it usually takes about an hour, and talk about what happened and figure out how somebody might be able to repair harm. So that's another one of those R's that Charmaine had put up. And we would have a written agreement about what might happen. So everybody has input into that. If there's something that somebody doesn't want to do or doesn't feel comfortable doing that is suggested, then we can address that and talk about what they might do instead. And they have a certain amount of time to finish those restorative justice requirements. In the 4th Judicial District, actually, if they finish restorative justice and their charges are dropped, and there was a new law that went into effect last year in Colorado, that when juveniles commit offenses and finish restorative justice, then their cases are expunged. So those kids' cases are automatically expunged by the court. And we have a couple other processes that we use. We do restorative circles, and that might be with a whole classroom. I'll tell you a little story about that. This was actually really fun. We were working with some 4th grade girls who were bullying the rest of the kids in the class. These girls were really cute. So we went in and met with the whole class, and we did this like 2 or 3 times and had a circle with them and just talked about at a 4th grade level relationship and what's important to kids. And eventually we started talking about respect, and we did a little art project with respect. And then after a while we took out these 3 or 4 4th grade girls. I think there were 3 of them. and met with them separately. And when we sat down to meet with them, I said, why do you think that we're here? And they said, oh, it's about us. It's about what we've been doing. So we worked with them to become leaders instead of become the kids that are making things more difficult in the classroom. So it was about developing a relationship with those kids, not calling them out, not making them the center of attention, but developing a relationship with them and being respectful of them, and then helping them, like I said, to become leaders in their classroom. So we can do restorative, and we sometimes work with schools in developing restorative conversations. So how do you deal with a kid who's maybe tardy to school every day, and how do you have a restorative conversation instead of a conversation that's punishing them or sending them to the principal's office like Charmaine described? I heard that, Charmaine.
And that's the thing that I think is, I don't know, I guess because of so much teacher training, it almost sounds counterintuitive that we're going to give respect to kids that are doing something that might be harmful to others. But look at how you can turn situations around. And I now it makes me curious to want to go look more at some of the bullying information, and the research around that, and see how many schools really incorporate restorative conversations, dialogues with kids, when there is bullying going on.
So, what's become pretty clear to me, I've been working in restorative justice for almost 20 years now, and have worked with schools a lot. Bullies have been bullied, or bullies have been harmed. So there is a reason why kids are bullying other kids. In restorative justice, we're not interested in punishing anybody. We're only interested in treating everybody respectfully. And punishment isn't even a word that we use, or is not part of the restorative vocabulary. We really want to get to the core of why kids are doing what they're doing, and what can we set out for them that's going to help them make decisions that are better for them and better for their school communities. Um, so I have seen a lot of bullying cases and been very successful with those. And
Yeah.
some of the agreement might be things around getting counseling, because there's bullies bully kids for a reason. And usually it's something they've experienced in their past that they haven't worked through and need some help with. So, yeah, there are, here's a story that might be really interesting to all of you. I was working with a high school, with a special ed student who had been bullied on Facebook by other kids in the school. And these were kids on the football team. So this ended up being a really big restorative justice conference. Usually there's maybe 6 or 8 of us, because parents might be there. There might be a few community members, 1 or 2 facilitators. But in this case, there were probably 20 people in that circle. The football coach was invited. Some of the football players were there. And part of the agreement at the end, it was an amazing conference, but part of the agreement at the end was that the special ed student who had been bullied was going to go over to one of the kids' houses who had been the primary bully. In this case, there was more than one. And the football player was going to teach him how to obtain some computer skills, something the special ed student was really interested in, and something the football player was really good at. So we are always also looking for kids who commit offenses, or people who commit offenses. What are you good at? Instead of punishing them, we want to take what they're really good at and have them bring that asset to their community, to the person that they committed the offense to. So, yeah, that's just an example of another bullying case that was really successful.
And I love that. And it's like so much integration with what I'm hoping teachers are learning today is identifying kids' strengths in the classroom and figuring out how we can tap into that to teach them new things. And so, yeah, with restorative justice and looking at, the offender, and what strengths that they can bring to the community versus labeling them, this bad kid. But you also have strengths and, pulling out those leadership skills and helping them. So, yeah, it just sounds like there's such an overlap between what I try to share with parents and teachers and what restorative justice does as far as the values and some of the strategies. So that is so neat. And we do, Michelle is on and she had an example here. She said, I'm watching because my kiddo was locked in a de-escalation room after having a meltdown and not snapping out of it. And this, unfortunately, is kind of a, typical situation as far as, teachers reacting in a more, I don't know, a serious kind of intervention where kids are either restrained or secluded. And so I know, Lynn, with talking to you, that we commonly think of when kids have done something that we want them to help repair. But there are also times when you have worked with a group and a school, and it's the teacher that needed to do the repair.
Yeah, that's always really interesting. I had said earlier that we invite community members. So when we have, it doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes it does happen that the student is the victim and the teacher is the person who committed the offense. Um, so when we start the conferences, we have, a very, we always start with introductions and a confidentiality agreement. And, we have a very structured beginning. People always assume, community members always assume that they were there because the kid committed the offense. And it really throws them off when it ends up being the teacher who committed the offense. But restorative justice can work both ways. There's no reason why we couldn't sit in a circle with a teacher who's harmed a kid and figure out what they could do to repair the harm. I think the truth is we all make mistakes, right? We all have made mistakes. We all probably will continue to make mistakes, unfortunately. And how do we fix them? So again, in that case, the teacher would have to be accountable for their behavior and would have to be willing to sit down and be willing to do something different to repair the harm. In that kind of case, I look at that as, maybe it wouldn't be up to me as a facilitator that should be in an agreement, but maybe that teacher needs some more training around how to handle those difficult kinds of situations. Actually, my dream would be that teacher education programs in college all have a restorative justice classroom management piece. I don't know of any actually teacher education program that does that, or any teacher education program that really does a good job of teaching classroom management. But I would love to see that happen. I would love to see teachers have a restorative way to deal with behavior rather than a punitive way. It's always about being punitive. And, Charmaine, when you were making your introduction, I was thinking about when schools call parents because your kids have had bad behavior or whatever they want to call it. I think that's the only time schools call parents is when they're frustrated or when their kids are in trouble. So I don't know of many parents that like to get calls from schools because they're always something difficult to deal with or something, that is going to make them feel really bad.
Right. Oh, exactly. And I want to tell people that are live with us and also that are watching on the replay, if you type the word resources in the comments, then my IEP bot will send you a message, and you type resources again, and you'll get signed up to get some additional resources. And we'll look at some of those in a few minutes too. But there is a lot of literature out there and other kinds of podcasts and webinars that I can help you tap into, because this is a field that is getting more notice and recognition, and people are seeing how valuable it is to integrate this into schools. And so, yeah, so just type the word resources in the comments, and I'll get you set up and we'll get those out to you. But then the other thing that you had talked about, and I know I'm living in Idaho now, but I lived in Colorado for over 40 years, and I remember the day of the Columbine High School shooting. I was still a teacher then, and I remember going and picking up two of my kids after high school, after the high school got out that day. And I don't think many of the kids knew exactly what had gone on hours before, but I just remember seeing kids coming out of Woodland Park High School just joking and talking to their friends. And I thought, boy, this is such a different picture than what I saw a couple hours ago when kids were in this panic and kids were being shot in the high school. And so that was a pretty critical moment, I think, in how things were done in schools in Colorado and then elsewhere. And we, as schools, we really adopted that zero tolerance philosophy of, there's like no strikes, you're just out the first time. But Lynn's husband, Pete, who is now a state senator in Colorado, who used to be in the House of Representatives, has written several bills about restorative justice. And also, I find it interesting now that in Colorado, they're looking at going away from that zero tolerance policy and seeing how that really wasn't as beneficial as we thought. So if you want to talk maybe a couple minutes, Lynn, about your husband's Pete's bills that he's written that have been enacted in Colorado.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think any of us will ever forget that day of Columbine. That was really sad and continues to be really sad, unfortunately. So in Colorado, after Columbine, like Charmaine said, the state schools adopted a zero tolerance policy, as did the legislature. So the schools began putting in their policy books uh, all of the kinds of offenses that admit that they could be for. So suspensions and expulsions increased dramatically. Um, and schools felt like schools had policies that they had to expel kids for certain behavior. Now that obviously that doesn't help because it continues to be a huge issue. But the legislature has changed its laws, and now the only reason that schools have to expel kids if they bring a weapon to school. So that would be a certain size of a knife or a gun. They don't have to expel them for anything else. I think what's true is, unfortunately, after Columbine, schools developed these policies around suspensions and expulsions and really got into a mindset of punishment for kids. And even though the laws have changed, it's been really difficult to turn that around. And I do see that changing some, but it's going to take time. I don't know how to go to Columbine. How long was that, Charmaine? They anniversary?
I know. I'm trying to think. I can't remember. Was it in the 90s? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. But still, we're living with results of that, which means more punishment, which and hasn't helped anything. I personally, like Charmaine had explained, I'm a retired special education teacher. I really don't understand why we don't want to keep kids in school. So I really struggle with suspension and expulsion, and believe that there's another way to deal with difficult behaviors or kids who are living in trauma. We see a lot of kids who've experienced a lot of trauma, and sometimes their behavior reflects that. So it seems like compassion could be brought to them.
Right. And I know Lynn and I have talked about, there are so many factors. I mean, you look at the implicit bias of teachers against students of color or students of disability, and the alarming amount, rate of suspensions and expulsions of students of color and students of disability, that have disabilities. And so there is, some factors that we can control and others that we can't. I mean, we hope that we continue to evolve, but the reality is there are teachers, there are principals, there are vice principals, there are, parents that have this prejudice against others, and that really can impact what happens to that student during the day.
Absolutely. I was telling Charmaine just a little bit ago that if I go into the courtroom, and I probably am in the courtroom 2 or 3 days a week, so this is just a juvenile court, there might be 15, 18 kids in there. 1, 2 might be a white kid. They're primarily, we have a pretty large Latino population and then a Black population, but I would say definitely more Black kids are charged than Latino kids, some Native American kids. It's, much less often that we will see a white kid in the courtroom.
Yeah. And then I know, Lynn, you were also talking about then how that changes as far as trying to train, facilitators and, people that can lead the restorative justice meetings, and making sure that we have people of color doing that versus us white middle class, women doing that.
Absolutely. I think it's really important in a restorative justice conference to bring like people together. So I have been developing very intentionally a bigger community member list with people of color. I just brought on a Native American facilitator, and now I'm going to be working with a Black gentleman who wants to help facilitate, and a Latino woman who's actually a police officer. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, I think that's really important. The other piece that's really important to us is to bring peers. So we try as often as we can to bring other kids into a conference. So if I'm meeting with a 16-year-old young man, I want to bring another 16-year-old young man, or maybe an 18-year-old who's had similar experiences. But I really want that person to feel comfortable. And so if they have peers that they're sitting with instead of all of us old people, excuse me, I'll speak for myself, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. So, and that's another similarity, because, when we have IEP meetings at school, we try to encourage parents to have their child come. But, as Dylan was getting older, like in 5th grade and such, we noticed that if he invited some friends also to the IEP meeting, that made him more comfortable and not like sitting at this table with all these adults staring at him. So I think if we look at some of the best practices that we use for IEP meetings in being respectful and hearing people's voices, that is also something that we can say, are we using this in other places in our school? How else can we incorporate these values in our school? And Lynn has shared some really good websites. So I just want to, well, first of all, I want to say hi because we've got lots of people watching us live. So Erica is here from Idaho. Nancy is here from Denver. And Nancy, there's going to be this wonderful national conference we'll talk about in Denver for restorative justice. Kimberly is also here with us. So we've got lots of people from different states. So it's fun to have you here. Make sure that you know that you can ask any questions. The other thing is to type in the comments the word resources if you want to get some additional resources that I put together for you. So that would be something that you could do too. But let's look at, well, first look, let me see, I've got to bring it up here. But the Colorado, let's look at the Colorado website. Well, maybe we should start with national. And then Lynn, do you want to talk about the national conference coming up? Will I pull up the website?
I would love to. We've been working really hard on that. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Deb Witzel from Boulder, Colorado, who's working with me. So we are working with the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice, and this is their 7th conference, national conference. It will be held in Denver, June 14th, 15th, and 16th. And there are pre-conference workshops on the Thursday of that week. There is actually a big education piece. So there will be a lot of breakout sessions with educators or about education. There's a really big youth piece also. And the youth are teaching an all-day workshop on Thursday. So that's pretty fun. That's exciting. And then they have a whole nother part of the conference that they're helping with. They have some breakout sessions and are doing some other things for us during that conference. But if you're interested in restorative justice, there it is. There's the website. Yeah, I would encourage you to go onto this website that Charmaine is posting and look at the conference. We're going to have some amazing speakers and entertainment. Yeah, and I have to tell you that I think the registration is going to be cut off early because we're going to be full. We're already over half full. So we'll be able to accept about 1,500 registrants. So we've already got over 700. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. Looking forward to that.
Yes, and I saw that Pete, your husband, is going to be one of the keynote speakers too.
He is. He's going to, actually, he's got quite a few pieces of the conference, but he's going to also introduce Adam Foss, who's going to be our keynote speaker on Friday. And Adam is a prosecutor from Boston and has a TED Talk. So if you wanted to watch that, he's just amazing. I'm really excited about his piece in our conference.
So what's his name again, Lynn?
Adam, and the last name is Foss, Foss. And he has
cool.
a talk. I can't remember what the name of it is, but.
So I'll look that up and I'll add it to our resources.
Okay.
And then the other thing I was going to show people on the national website is that you can go to a link. Now I got to find where it is, but there's a link where it shows different school places. Now I don't know, where it is, but But anyway, you can go to their website, and I'll put the link in the resources for you. But there is a list of some of the kind of model programs of restorative justice. I know Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, for those people on the West Coast, has done a lot. Minnesota has done a lot. There's things going on in a variety of states. And I think, like everything else, you just have to really be a critical consumer and see if it's a model that really encompasses the values and that it's implemented with fidelity versus somebody that just says we have restorative justice, but really isn't, in line with the values of it. So the other resource was the Colorado. So restorative justice in Colorado. So let me see if I can pull that one up. And they also have information. They have a specific tab for schools. So like Lynn said, sometimes the restorative justice is thought about as far as in the justice system, but it also can happen in the school system. So let me see if I can get this to cooperate, because I wanted to show you that. But I also have it's not like going over there for me. I also have the links that I can give you. So do you see I don't know why it's not switching for me. But the Restorative Justice website in Colorado has a whole section on restorative practices in schools. And so that can be really helpful for people too. We have some more people that have hopped on. So let me see if any of you have questions. Susan is here with us also. So welcome, you guys. I'm glad that you could be with us today. Another exciting thing that is happening in Lynn's life is that she has been approached by TED Talk to apply to be one of the presenters in TED Talk. So, Lynn, why don't you tell us what that process has been like so far? And she would be talking about restorative justice.
I would. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. We'll see where that goes. But I was actually doing an interview on Colorado Public Radio, and somebody from TED Talks heard that interview and contacted me. So if you ever wonder how one gets to do a TED Talk, this is what my process has been so far. I was interviewed by phone. Well, first they asked me if I would be willing to be interviewed. So I said yes, and they interviewed me by phone, and we talked for a while. That was really fun because I got to talk about my favorite subject. And so then she said, okay, I would like you to be interviewed by, I think she called him the producer. So I just had another interview with the two of them. And now they've asked me to submit an outline. And then in the beginning of March, they will review all the outlines and select those that they are going to choose for TED Talks. And I think those talks there's one in the summer and then another one in the fall. So yeah, we'll see.
So yeah, think of the impact and the way that you can
Yeah,
so many other people know what restorative justice is about. It's
yeah,
like,
that's what's
yes.
exciting.
So that is wonderful news. I think, why don't we go back to the slide where we talk about the 5 R's as we're kind of wrapping things up. And if there's anything else that you want to mention about kind of the values of restorative justice, Lynn. So I'll bring this up for people to see.
I would like to talk a little bit about the website that didn't appear. It's called rjcolorado.org, and so it's our state website for restorative justice. That was that council that developed that website. I sit on the council. It was developed by legislation, so mandated through legislation, and we have all kinds of people on that council. From law enforcement, we have a judge, we have somebody from probation, somebody from parole, we have a police officer, we have an educator. There's a lot of people on that council. And part of our mandate was to develop that website, but we also support restorative justice programs. So one of the restorative justice laws that was passed put a $10 fee charge on every person who committed an offense who went through the judicial system, and that funding goes to restorative justice. There it is. And so we fund programs around the state, programs that work in the justice system, but also programs that run in their schools and in their community. So that council is something that no other state has. I guess I'd also like to encourage you, if you find a restorative justice program in your community, you should be able to volunteer as a community member, maybe only once if that's all that interests you. But it would be a way for you to really understand what restorative justice is and advocate for that in your schools or for your kids.
So yeah, that would be so good, because I think that's part of the thing now, is for parents to know where they can tap into different information. And I mean, even looking at the laws that Colorado has passed, if you are interested in public policy making and as a parent want to get more involved in that, restorative justice would be like an excellent area that you might want to tap into. So it's always so helpful when we can look to others and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I really encourage you to look at this Colorado website about restorative justice, and see if it's something that you would like to replicate in your state too.
There was also part of the legislation that was passed in Colorado says that judges in the juvenile courts have to tell juveniles that they may have an opportunity for restorative justice. So every time a juvenile appears in court, they have to be given that information that can be an option for them.
See, and that makes like a huge difference. And so I wonder, like, how were judges, like, are they trained on this, or like, how do we make sure that they know about that,
Well, that's a great question, Charmaine. So judges I've learned a lot since being a legislator. So yeah, you think a law's passed and then it just happens, but that's not exactly true. So judges do go to training after the legislative session and are trained on new laws that are passed that affect them in the courtroom. But in Colorado, when I go to court for my kids, the judges always say that. They always mention restorative justice as an option. But if they didn't, if I had a parent who was in court with their child, I could ask for restorative justice. So our judges do it. I don't know what goes on around the state. I don't know if other judges around the state talk about, do list restorative justice and options for juveniles, but I know ours do.
Well, yeah. And see, all of that makes such a larger system working together versus just, small pieces making change. But when you can have the legislation, when you can have the judges trained, when we can do more with teacher education programs and higher ed, and servicing to teachers and schools that are already working, all of that, all of those pieces together create positive change for kids. And instead of looking at kids as being the one that needs to be fixed, we can look at students as having needs. And as adults, we need to figure out how can we change the climate and the culture to embrace kids, especially kids with differences, and support them versus doing the whole punishment thing,
And I would add, how do we as educators commit to developing relationships with kids? Because ultimately, I think it's all about relationships.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think, like I say, when I talk about advocacy to parents, I say it's the 3 R's are relationships, relationships,
Right.
relationships. And we're seeing more and more research done on the connection between teachers and students and the difference that that makes. Um, and I know I had just put something up on my Facebook page about, your child is not, trying to, do this attention getting behavior. It's more of a way for them to attach, and it's attachment kind of behavior where they're seeking out those relationships and that wanting that sense of belonging and know that they are connected to the community there in the school and also, in their neighborhoods.
Right. Right.
So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lynn. I don't see any other live comments. I know that we'll have more comments and questions as people watch the replay. Just as a reminder, type in the word resources and you'll get a list that I've been collecting about resources, especially with using restorative justice in schools. It can certainly be a topic of discussion that parents raise at district-wide task force or on committees. You can go to school board meetings and encourage your school board to look at this and how they can officially adopt using a restorative justice model in the building and in all the schools in the district. So even as a parent, that sometimes we feel like we're just a parent, but you have the ability to be a stronger voice. You have the ability to widen your circle, bring other supporters with you, and make changes. So kids are supported, happy, and learning at school. Next week, next Thursday, I will be back here for another Facebook Live, and we're going to continue the discussion. I'm going to also share with you some other specific parts about restorative justice that I've been learning about. So we're going to continue the conversation next week. But Lynn, thank you so much for carving out your time today to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
And good luck, and maybe we'll see you on the TED Talk stage.
That would be exciting, huh?
Yes, yes, yes. So, everybody have a wonderful day, and we shall see you next Thursday at noon Mountain Time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.